Welcome, my dear friends. Settle down right here by the fireplace. The fire is crackling so beautifully tonight, isn't it? I have been waiting for you, and I have a very special tale to share. They say the richest man in the ancient city of Oakhaven had a heart so terribly heavy with gold he never realized it had stopped beating with compassion, until the fateful night a single silver coin cost him everything he ever loved. If you enjoy stories that warm the heart and leave you with a valuable lesson, subscribe to Nanny Granny's Golden Tales and become part of our storytelling family. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I love reading every comment. Now, let us travel back to an era when the grand cobblestone streets of Oakhaven rang loudly from dawn until dusk. In the center of this prosperous, thriving city stood a magnificent mansion of carved white stone and dark mahogany. It completely dominated the skyline and cast a long shadow over the humbler houses below. This glorious estate was the fortress of Elias Thorne. Elias Thorne was a merchant of unparalleled success and terrifying ambition. He traded in the most luxurious goods known to mankind, the softest silks from distant empires, fragrant exotic spices, and precious glittering gemstones. His massive warehouses near the harbor were overflowing with priceless treasures guarded day and night. But Elias, my dear friends, was a deeply flawed man. He measured his entire worth and the worth of every person he met purely by the weight of the gold in his ledger. Over the long years of building his vast financial empire, he had deliberately forgotten the priceless value of a genuine smile, the warmth of a shared meal, and the grounding joy of human connection. His piercing eyes had become completely blind to the agonizing suffering of his fellow men. To Elias, poverty was not a misfortune, it was a personal failure, a disease that infected only the lazy and the weak-willed. It was the chilling eve of the great winter festival. The sky above Oakhaven was a bruised purple, pregnant with the promise of a severe snowstorm. The freezing wind howled mournfully through the alleyways, rattling the street lamps, and sending a bitter chill into the bones of anyone caught outside. Inside Elias's grand counting house, however, the atmosphere was stiflingly warm. A roaring hearth blazed brightly with oak logs, and the air smelled of roasted meats and sweet mulled wine. Elias sat rigidly at his imposing oak desk, his fingers stained dark with imported ink, as he meticulously tallied his profits. The only sounds in the room were the scratching of his quill and the crackling of the fire. Suddenly, a timid, fragile knock echoed through the heavy wooden door. It was so faint that Elias almost mistook it for the wind. He frowned deeply, his thick eyebrows drawing together in annoyance at the interruption. He barked an impatient command without lifting his head, and his timid young clerk, Thomas, hurried to unlatch the door. Standing there on the freezing threshold, surrounded by swirling snow, was a man who looked infinitely more like a fragile ghost than a human being. His clothes were a tragic collection of filthy rags held together by frost and twine. His boots were worn through the soles, his bruised toes exposed directly to the unforgiving ice. He trembled violently, his chapped lips tinged with an unnatural shade of blue. This poor, wretched soul was named Silas. Silas had once been a respected, hard-working carpenter in Oakhaven, known for his sturdy tables and kind demeanor. But a tragic accident involving a collapsing roof had permanently damaged his spine, taking his livelihood in an instant. Soon after, a vicious illness had taken his beloved wife. Now, Broken and destitute, he fought a daily battle just to keep himself and his young granddaughter, Lily, alive in a world that had forgotten them. Silas stepped hesitantly forward into the opulent room, clutching a tattered woolen cap in his shivering hands. "Master Thorne," Silas whispered, his voice cracking like dry parchment blowing in the wind. "I humbly beg of you, sir. I know I have no right to intrude upon your evening, but the winter is so extraordinarily cruel tonight. My little granddaughter, my sweet Lily, she is burning with a terrible fever." Silas fell weakly to his knees. "I need only a single tiny copper coin to buy her a soothing draught of medicine from the apothecary across the square. Just one coin, kind sir. I promise you, I will sweep your floors, I will carry your heaviest crates, I will work until my hands bleed to repay your generosity." Elias did not even bother to look up from his ledger. The sharp scratching of his quill continued, a cold, heartless sound echoing in the warm room. "If I carelessly handed out a copper coin to every whining stray dog that scratched at my door, Silas, I would very soon find myself rotting in the streets beside you," Elias sneered, his tone dripping with absolute contempt. Elias finally lifted his cold eyes and glared at the broken man. "True wealth, old man, is fiercely earned by those with the relentless strength to seize it. It is never simply handed over to those who are too weak to stand on their own 2 feet. You dare to speak of illness and the harsh winter as if they are my personal doing. They are not my concern. The world is a cruel place, and you have simply failed to conquer it. Now leave my sight immediately, before I summon the watchman and have you thrown into the freezing jail." Young Thomas, the gentle clerk, looked on with empathetic tears welling in his youthful eyes. He quietly reached into his own pocket, hoping to find a spare fraction of a coin, but Elias caught the movement and violently slammed his hand onto the desk. "Do not even dare, Thomas," Elias roared. "Charity only breeds laziness and entitlement. Let him learn the harsh lessons of this unforgiving world." Silas looked at Elias, not with fiery anger, but with a profound, overwhelming sorrow. He slowly pushed himself up from the floor, his broken body aching with every movement. He placed his threadbare cap back onto his head and pulled his ragged coat a little tighter around his shivering shoulders. "Gold certainly warms the pocket, Master Thorne," Silas said softly, his quiet words carrying a strange, haunting weight that seemed to chill the blazing room. "But it freezes the soul until nothing human remains. I pray to the heavens above that you never have to learn firsthand just how agonizingly cold this world can truly be." With that ominous statement, the old broken man turned and vanished back into the blinding fury of the snowstorm. If you're enjoying this story so far, please take a moment to like the video. It helps these stories reach more people who need a little inspiration today. Elias scoffed loudly, arrogantly dismissing the desperate beggar's words as the meaningless rambling of a defeated man. He firmly closed his ledger, immensely satisfied with his fortune, and retired upstairs to his lavish bedchamber. He slept soundly that night in his massive feather bed, buried beneath luxurious quilts. But fate, my dear friends, is an unstoppable wheel that never stops turning. And the very next morning, as the sun struggled to pierce the gray winter clouds, that wheel began to turn violently for Elias Thorne. It started with a frantic knock at the front door, far more urgent than the gentle tapping of the night before. It was a breathless messenger running frantically from the city harbor. A massive, unprecedented tempest, a monstrous storm completely unlike anything seen in Oakhaven for over a century, had viciously ravaged the southern trading straits during the night. Elias's entire fleet of merchant ships, heavily laden with priceless silks, rare spices, and chests of pure gold, had been brutally swallowed whole by the roaring sea. Elias rushed out to the harbor, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He stood frozen in the ankle-deep slush, staring out at the churning waters in absolute disbelief. Every single wooden crate, every shiny coin, every meter of expensive silk was lost forever to the dark, crushing depths. His entire empire wiped out in a single watery breath. But the horrifying tragedy was far from over. As he stood there in catatonic shock, the frantic ringing of the city's brass alarm bells suddenly pierced the freezing morning air. He whipped his head around, his eyes widening in pure terror, to see a massive pillar of thick black smoke rising violently from the very heart of the merchant district. He ran until his lungs burned with agonizing fire, his expensive leather boots slipping dangerously on the treacherous ice. When he finally reached the bustling district, his legs gave way beneath him, and he fell heavily to his knees in the soot-stained snow. His sprawling warehouses, the magnificent buildings that held the absolute entirety of his remaining inventory, were completely engulfed in roaring flames. A fallen lantern, a careless night watchman, a stray spark, it did not matter how the terrible inferno had started. The incredibly dry structural timber and highly flammable exotic oils fed the hungry beast of the fire perfectly. In less than 24 agonizing hours, Elias Thorne plummeted from being the wealthiest, most powerful man in Oakhaven to a ruined, broken man who owned absolutely nothing but the smoky clothes on his back and a literal mountain of unpaid debts to unforgiving creditors. The aggressive creditors wasted absolutely no time. They descended upon him like starving vultures. Within a single week, the grand, towering mansion was legally seized by the city banks. The beautiful mahogany furniture, the shining silver plates, the heavy velvet curtains, every single item was ruthlessly auctioned off to the highest bidder to satisfy his staggering debts. Elias was violently cast out of his own home, thrown forcefully onto the very same cold cobblestone streets he had once ruled with an arrogant golden fist. Desperate, incredibly hungry, and shivering uncontrollably in the harsh winter wind, Elias frantically sought out the wealthy, influential men he had foolishly called his friends. He went first to Lord Harrington, a powerful nobleman who had eagerly dined at Elias's lavish table 100 times, happily drinking his finest imported wines. "Harrington, my dearest friend," Elias pleaded desperately, standing pitifully at the ornate iron gates of the nobleman's grand estate. "I am in dire need of a temporary loan, just a small sum to help me get back on my feet." But Lord Harrington merely looked down at him from his towering stone balcony with profoundly indifferent eyes. "A poor, ruined merchant is a terrible, foolish investment, Elias. You have absolutely nothing to offer me now. Good day to you, and do not return." Elias was shattered, but he kept trying. He went to the powerful guild master, a man whose lucrative election Elias had personally funded. The guildmaster coldly ordered his armed guards to forcefully turn Elias away at the door. He went to the wealthy silversmith, the popular master tailor, the city's chief banker, Every single heavy wooden door that had once been eagerly thrown open for Elias, the wealthy merchant, was now unapologetically slammed shut right in the desperate face of Elias, the beggar. He realized, with a crushing weight pressing down on his chest, that absolutely none of these powerful men had ever actually been his true friends. They had only ever been friends with his deep pockets and his overflowing vaults. Without his gold, he was completely invisible to them. He was nothing but a nuisance, a stain on their pristine streets. As the bitter weeks dragged on, the harsh winter aggressively tightened its icy grip on the sprawling city of Oakhaven. Elias Thorne, the proud man who had once slept exclusively on soft feathers and imported silk, now slept fitfully on the cold, unforgiving cobblestones. He huddled desperately beneath damp stone bridges, trying in vain to hide from the vicious wind that seemed to hunt him specifically. His fine clothes quickly tore and turned into filthy rags. His once full cheeks hollowed out terribly, his skin grew dangerously pale, and his arrogant spirit completely shattered. He felt the gnawing, sharp, constant physical pain of true starvation, a terrifying pain he had once arrogantly dismissed as a dramatic myth invented by the lazy. Every single time he hesitantly held out his trembling, dirty hand, begging softly for a stale crust of bread or a single copper coin to buy a moment of warmth, he saw the faces of the busy people walking rapidly past him. They looked down at him with blatant disgust, with obvious annoyance, with the very same cold, dead, judgmental eyes he had once used to look at poor Silas. The devastating memory of the old, trembling beggar standing in his warm counting house began to violently haunt Elias's every waking moment and every freezing, sleepless night. Gold warms the pocket, but it freezes the soul. The haunting words constantly echoed loudly in his tormented mind, like a terrifying death knell. He understood the terrifying truth now. He finally, truly understood the unbearable, agonizing cruelty of being completely unseen, of being casually treated as something significantly less than human by your fellow man. It happened on the absolute coldest, most terrifying night of the entire year, the dreaded night of the winter solstice. The heavy snow was falling in incredibly thick, blinding, suffocating white sheets. The violent wind howled through the city like a massive pack of starving, angry wolves. Elias slowly, painfully dragged his failing body through the darkened, empty streets, his vital organs shutting down one by one. He had not eaten a single crumb of food in 3 long, agonizing days. His hands and feet were entirely, dangerously numb. He could not even feel his own face anymore. He stumbled blindly into a narrow, dark, forgotten alleyway, desperately seeking any tiny escape from the murderous, freezing wind. His weak, trembling legs finally gave out completely. He collapsed heavily into a deep, freezing snowdrift, the icy, powdery white snow immediately clinging aggressively to his ruined, ragged clothes. He tried desperately to stand, to keep moving, but he had absolutely no physical strength left in his frail body. As the heavy, dark, overwhelming veil of sleep began to descend rapidly over him, a highly dangerous, deceitfully warm sleep that he instinctively knew in his heart he would never wake from, he slowly closed his tired eyes. A single, freezing, tragic tear rolled slowly down his dirty, hollow cheek. He whispered weakly into the howling, uncaring wind, I am so sorry. I am so profoundly sorry for my cruelty. Warmth. It was the absolute first shocking thing Elias felt. A gentle, radiant, incredible warmth slowly spreading through his frozen, lifeless limbs like a divine blessing. He slowly, painfully fluttered his incredibly heavy eyelids open, half expecting to see the afterlife. But he was no longer lying in the freezing, snowy alleyway. He was lying comfortably on a simple, remarkably soft straw mattress inside a small, incredibly modest, but wonderfully sturdy wooden cabin. The wooden walls were completely bare, the floor was simply tightly packed earth, but a cheerful, bright fire cracked merrily and loudly in a small stone hearth. He weakly turned his heavy head and saw a small, rough-hewn wooden table. Sitting peacefully right beside the warm fire, humming a quiet, incredibly soothing, angelic melody, was a young, frail girl with remarkably bright, impossibly kind eyes. She was carefully, methodically stirring a heavy cast-iron pot that smelled so wonderfully, so intoxicatingly of rich chicken broth and roasted root vegetables that Elias's stomach ached. Hearing the rustle of the straw mattress as he stirred, the young girl turned her head and offered him a radiant, beautiful, completely genuine smile. "Oh, you are finally awake," she said softly, her voice like chiming bells. "Grandfather said you definitely would be. He told me you were an incredibly stubborn man." Before the confused Elias could even attempt to speak, the heavy wooden door of the small cabin creaked loudly open. A tall, sturdy figure stepped quickly inside, shaking the heavy white snow vigorously from his thick wool cloak. Elias gasped sharply. The warm air completely caught in his dry throat. The man standing there by the door, carrying a massive, heavy bundle of freshly chopped firewood, was Silas, the very same desperate, freezing beggar Elias had turned away so cruelly and heartlessly on that fateful, terrible night in the counting-house. Silas looked noticeably older now, his gentle face deeply lined with the relentless hardships of life. But there was a profound, beautiful, peaceful light shining brightly in his kind eyes that Elias Thorne had never, ever possessed, not even for a moment at the absolute height of his staggering wealth. Silas carefully set the heavy wood down by the hearth and walked slowly over to the bed, holding a steaming, warm wooden mug of the delicious broth. "Drink this slowly, Master Thorne," Silas said gently, his soft voice holding absolutely no malice, no lingering anger, and no desire for revenge, only a deep, overflowing, genuine compassion. "You have had a very long, very terrible, and incredibly close battle with the winter frost tonight." Elias could not drink. His hands trembled violently, uncontrollably, not from the lingering cold of the snow, but from an overwhelming, crushing, utterly devastating wave of profound shame and powerful guilt. Tears, hot, bitter, stinging, endless tears, flooded his tired eyes and spilled heavily over his hollow cheeks, completely soaking his tangled, dirty beard. He fell awkwardly forward, slipping weakly off the straw mattress, and buried his weeping face in his trembling hands right at Silas's worn leather boots. "Why?" Elias sobbed uncontrollably, his broken voice shattering into a million pathetic pieces. "Why in the world are you helping me? After exactly what I did to you, after the monstrous cruelty I showed you. I arrogantly refused you when your innocent granddaughter was violently sick. I mocked your terrible pain. I am a horrible monster, Silas. I deserve nothing but to freeze alone in that dark, cold alleyway. Silas slowly knelt down on the packed earth floor and placed a rough, heavily calloused, incredibly warm hand gently on Elias's trembling, frail shoulder. "Stand up, Elias," he said softly, but with a quiet, undeniable strength. "Please, my friend, stand up." He gently but firmly helped the broken, weeping merchant back onto the simple bed. Silas looked fondly toward the young, smiling girl sitting happily by the crackling fire. "My little precious Lily miraculously survived that terrible winter," Silas explained quietly, his eyes shining with profound gratitude. "A very kind, generous apothecary in the square took deep pity on our pathetic state and gave us the necessary medicine entirely on credit. It was a terrifying, terribly close battle, but she possesses a wonderfully strong spirit." Silas paused for a moment, his kind, weathered eyes beautifully reflecting the warm, dancing, golden light of the blazing fire. "As for exactly why I chose to save you tonight, when I stumbled upon you buried deeply in that terrible snowdrift, Elias, I absolutely did not see the wealthy, arrogant, unbelievably cruel merchant who had viciously turned me away. I simply saw a man, a fragile, suffering human being who was in desperate need of a helping hand. If I had callously walked away and left you there to die alone in the bitter snow, Elias, then my own living soul would have instantly become just as frozen, just as dead, and just as empty as yours once was. True wealth, my friend, is absolutely never measured by the cold gold locked securely inside a heavy steel vault. True wealth is only ever measured by the immense amount of boundless love, genuine compassion, and pure forgiveness you can manage to hold within your beating heart. Elias wept even harder. He wept loudly and completely without restraint for the many long, foolish years he had carelessly wasted, ruthlessly chasing cold, lifeless, meaningless metal. He wept bitterly for the many struggling people he had arrogantly ignored, for the immense, unnecessary pain he had actively caused, and for the utterly empty, remarkably hollow, meaningless life he had spent decades building. Right there in that small, incredibly humble wooden cabin, entirely stripped of absolutely everything he had ever owned or valued, Elias Thorne finally, truly found his lost soul. Elias did not leave the small cabin when he eventually recovered his physical strength weeks later. He truly had nowhere else in the world to go. But far more importantly, he fundamentally did not want to leave. He humbly asked Silas if he could possibly stay and help him with his daily burdens. Silas, who had finally secured modest, steady work carving intricate, beautiful wooden toys for the local village children, happily and warmly agreed. Elias, the powerful man who had once aggressively traded in flawless diamonds and commanded massive fleets of towering ships, patiently and humbly learned how to whittle small blocks of wood. He happily learned how to meticulously sweep the dirt floors, to carefully chop the heavy firewood, and to slowly cook the simple, hearty meals they shared. He found a strange, incredibly beautiful, and profound peace in the hard, honest, simple physical labor. He found genuine, bubbling joy in little Lily's bright, ringing laughter, in the simple, quiet sharing of a warm, freshly baked loaf of bread, and in the deep, philosophical, quiet conversations with Silas by the fading fire each night. Over the passing years, as the seasons changed, Elias slowly and carefully began to use his incredibly sharp, brilliant mind for the world of business once again. But this time, his motivations were entirely, radically different. He used his vast knowledge to help the poor local artisans effectively sell their beautiful crafts for fair, honest prices at the bustling markets. He carefully organized the struggling market vendors, generously helping them maximize their modest profits so they could comfortably feed their growing families. Slowly, step by patient step, Elias built a completely new, vastly different life. He never, ever regained the massive, staggering, overwhelming financial wealth of his arrogant youth, and he truly, deeply never wanted to. When he finally, after many years of honest labor, saved enough humble copper and silver coins to buy a small, empty plot of land near the center of the city, he absolutely did not build another grand, towering mansion. Instead, he worked with Silas to build a large, remarkably sturdy, welcoming wooden hall. He filled it entirely with long, sturdy oak tables, massive piles of thick, warm woolen blankets, and several huge, blazing stone hearths. It quickly became a known, safe, wonderful sanctuary for the poor, the lost, the broken, and the weary. Anyone who was terribly hungry, anyone who was freezing in the harsh, unforgiving Oakhaven winters, absolutely knew without a doubt that they could always find a steaming, hot meal and a safe, warm bed at Elias's hall. Elias worked tirelessly there every single day from dawn until dusk, standing proudly at the heavy front door, personally and warmly welcoming every single ragged traveler and destitute, shivering beggar with a bright, genuine smile and a completely open, loving heart. And standing right beside him, supporting him completely until the very end of his incredibly long, wonderfully fulfilled days, was his dearest, most treasured, and most loyal friend in the entire world, Silas. And that, my dear, wonderful friends, is the incredible true story of Elias Thorne, a man who tragically had to lose the entire physical world in order to finally, truly, find his own precious soul. It constantly reminds us that the absolute greatest, most valuable treasures we can ever possess in this fleeting life are never, ever the shiny things we can securely lock away in a heavy wooden box. They are only ever the beautiful things we choose to give away freely to others. Compassion, profound forgiveness, and boundless kindness. For a truly kind, loving heart, my darlings, is unquestionably worth vastly more than all the glittering gold in the whole wide world. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to Nanny Granny's Golden Tales for more timeless tales and endless wisdom. And tell me in the comments, what lesson did you learn from today's story?